Welcome to Dr. Harmony. They say that a home is built on love, but sometimes it is constructed on a foundation of lies that take decades to crumble. Today I am sharing a story that comes from the deepest, coldest corners of a father's heart. A story of a man who gave everything to his only son, only to realize he was being traded away like a piece of unwanted furniture. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from the people you trust most, this story is for you. Sit back, listen closely, and remember. Blood may be thicker than water, but greed is often more corrosive than acid. Let us dive into the story of Arthur and the price of a lifetime of devotion. The rain in Chicago never felt as cold as it did the night my son, Ethan, first mentioned the Silver Oaks. I am Arthur, a 60-year-old man who spent 35 of those years working the steel docks and managing logistics so that my son would never have to know the callous of a hard day's labor. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 5 years ago, leaving me this brownstone house, a sanctuary of memories, mahogany wood, and the lingering scent of her lavender perfume. It was supposed to be my fortress. It was supposed to be our family legacy. But as I sat across from Ethan and his wife, Clara, the air in my own dining room felt thin, as if they were already sucking the oxygen out of my life. Ethan was my pride. I saw my own jawline in him, my own stubborn streak, but he had a softness that I thought was kindness. It turns out that softness was just a lack of backbone. He had married Clara 3 years ago. She was beautiful in a sharp, crystalline way, the kind of one who wore designer coats and spoke in a voice that was always a little too calm, a little too rehearsed. Since they moved into their own apartment downtown, our Sunday dinners had changed. They were no longer about catching up. They were about logistics. "Dad," Ethan started, swirling the expensive red wine I had bought for the occasion. He didn't look at me. He looked at the label on the bottle. "Clara and I have been doing a lot of research. You're 60 now. The stairs in this house, they aren't getting any shorter. We're worried about your safety." I laughed, a short, dry sound. "I've climbed those stairs for 30 years, Ethan. I think I know how to navigate my own home." "It's not just the stairs, Arthur," Clara interjected, her smile not reaching her eyes. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cold. "We visited Silver Oaks last week. It's a premier assisted living community. It's like a 5-star hotel. You'd have peers, medical staff on site, and no more worrying about the gardening or the taxes on this large, aging property." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind rattling the window panes. Assisted living, a nursing home. They were wrapping it in velvet words like premier and community, but the core of it was simple. They wanted me out. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend my right to live in the home I had paid for with my sweat. Instead, he just nodded along with her. "It's for the best, Dad. We just want you to be happy, and honestly, the upkeep on this place is becoming a burden on all of us." A burden. The word stung more than any physical blow. I had never been a burden when I was paying for Ethan's Ivy League tuition. I had never been a burden when I gave them $50,000 for their wedding down payment. I sat there, stunned into silence, watching them exchange a quick, triumphant glance. They thought they were winning. They thought the old man was slowing down enough to be manipulated. That night, after they left, I sat in the dark of my study. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the shadows of the room surround me. I looked at the photos on the wall. Ethan as a toddler, Ethan at graduation, my son, my only child. Why was he so insistent? He knew I loved this house. He knew I promised Eleanor I'd never leave it. I decided to play along for a few days, to see the depth of their concern. I told them I would think about it. The change in their demeanor was instant. They became overly attentive, calling me every morning, bringing me pastries, talking incessantly about the amenities at Silver Oaks. But Clara made a mistake. She grew impatient. She thought I was already halfway out the door, and she began to treat my home as if it were already her renovation project. A week later, I was in the kitchen fixing tea when I heard them in the hallway. They didn't know I was home. They thought I had gone to the pharmacy. "The appraiser said we could get 1.2 million easily," Clara's voice echoed, sharp and eager. "With that, we can finally move into the Heights. And once the old man is settled in the home, he won't need his savings account anyway. We'll need to get power of attorney signed before the end of the month." I know," Ethan muttered. He sounded tired, but not guilty. "I'll talk to him. He trusts me. Just stop pushing so hard, Clara. He's sensitive. He's an obstacle, Ethan. $1 million obstacle, sitting in a dusty house." The tea bag in my hand tore, spilling black leaves across the counter like ash. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not with the frailty of age, but with the cold, hard rhythm of a man who had just realized he was being hunted by his own kin. They weren't worried about my safety. They were counting the coins on my eyes before I was even dead. The air in the kitchen felt like it had frozen solid. I stood there clutching the torn tea bag, listening to the muffled sounds of my son and his wife discussing my life as if it were a real estate transaction. They weren't just waiting for me to grow old. They were actively trying to accelerate the process, to push me into a gilded cage so they could feast on the remains of my hard work. I didn't make a sound. I didn't drop the mug. I practiced the same discipline I had used for decades on the docks. Staying quiet, staying observant, and waiting for the right moment to strike. When I finally walked into the living room, I forced my face into a mask of tired confusion. "Ethan? Clara, I didn't know you were still here," I said, my voice intentionally trembling just a fraction. It was a performance. If they wanted a frail old man, I would give them one until I was ready to show them the wolf that still lived inside. Clara jumped, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh, Arthur, you startled us. We just stopped back in to check on some measurements for the new curtains we want to buy for your room at Silver Oaks." "Measurements," I repeated, nodding slowly. "How thoughtful of you, Clara. Always thinking ahead." Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Yeah, Dad. We just want the transition to be seamless. You know, no stress." "No stress," I echoed. "That sounds wonderful. Tell me, Ethan, have you looked into the legalities of all this? If I move, what happens to this house? To your mother's things?" I saw Clara's eyes gleam. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She stepped forward, her voice dropping into that sugary, patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being clever. "Well, Arthur, that's the thing. To pay for the premium care at Silver Oaks, and it is expensive, only the best for you. It might be simplest to put the house in Ethan's name. It would save on inheritance taxes later, and we could manage the sale or the rental to fund your lifestyle there. We've already drafted some papers, just standard stuff, really." "Standard stuff," I murmured. "I see. We can bring them over tomorrow," Ethan added, his voice gaining a bit of false strength now that his wife was leading the charge. "It'll take the weight off your shoulders, Dad. You've worked long enough." I smiled at them, a thin, ghostly smile. "Tomorrow, then. I think I'll go lie down now. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by all your generosity." As I walked up the stairs, I could practically hear them, high-fiving in the foyer. They thought I was broken. They thought the old man was finally surrendering to the fog of age. But as soon as I closed my bedroom door, the frailty vanished. I sat at my desk and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. I began to list everything, every penny I had given Ethan, every loan I had forgiven, every sacrifice I had made to ensure he had the life I never did. The next morning, I didn't wait for them to come to me. I made a phone call to an old friend, Victor. Victor was a retired attorney who had spent his career untangling the messes of corporate sharks. He was the kind of man who knew where every body was buried in this city, metaphorically speaking. "Arthur," Victor said, his voice deep and gravelly over the line. "It's been a while. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Victor, I need a favor," I said, my voice cold and clear. I need to know exactly how to protect a fortress from a siege, and I need it done before sunset. I spent the afternoon at Victor's office downtown. We sat in a room that smelled of old paper and expensive tobacco. I told him everything, the conversation I'd overheard, the standard papers Clara was bringing over, and the betrayal that was cutting deeper than I cared to admit. Victor listened, his brow furrowed, his fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. "They're moving fast, Arthur," Victor said. "Greed makes people sloppy, but it also makes them dangerous. If you sign those papers, you're signed your life away. They can move you into that facility and sell this house within 48 hours. You'll be a guest in your own life, living on an allowance they decide to give you. I'm not signing anything, Victor, but I want them to think I am. I want to see how far they'll go." "That's a dangerous game," Victor warned. "But if that's how you want to play it, we need to restructure your entire estate. We need to move the assets into a private trust that they can't touch. And we need to change your will, today." By the time I left Victor's office, I felt a strange sense of peace. The sadness was still there, a heavy, aching weight in my chest. But it was now tempered by a cold, hard anger. My son had chosen a side. He had chosen the gleam of $1 million sale over the father who had raised him. He had chosen a woman who saw me as an obstacle over the man who had taught him how to walk. When I got home, Ethan and Clara were already waiting on the porch. They had a man with them, a notary, no doubt. They were dressed in their Sunday best, looking like the perfect, concerned family. "Dad, where have you been?" Ethan asked, his face tight with anxiety. "We were worried." "Just taking a walk, Ethan. Enjoying the air while I still can," I said, patting him on the shoulder. I looked at the briefcase in Clara's hand. "Are those the papers?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice trembling with suppressed excitement. "Everything is ready, Arthur. We can do this right now in the comfort of your living room, then we can go out for a nice dinner to celebrate your new chapter." I opened the front door and gestured for them to enter. "A new chapter," I said. "Yes, I think that's exactly what this is." We sat at the dining table, the same table where I had served them dinner just nights before. The notary laid out the documents. I looked at the lines where my signature was supposed to go. My name, my legacy, my life. "Just sign here, Dad," Ethan whispered, pushing a pen toward me. I picked up the pen. I looked at Clara, who was leaning forward, her eyes locked on the paper. I looked at Ethan, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I held the pen above the paper for a long, agonizing minute. I could see Clara's pulse jumping in her neck. Then, I put the pen down. "You know," I said, leaning back and locking eyes with my son, "I was thinking about that time you fell off your bike when you were 7. You cried for an hour. Not because you were hurt, but because you were afraid I'd be mad that you broke the bike. Do you remember what I told you?" Ethan blinked, confused. "What? Dad, what does that have to do with—" "I told you that things don't matter, Ethan. People do. I told you that a bike can be replaced, but a son cannot." I paused, my voice hardening. "It seems you've forgotten that lesson. Or perhaps you've just decided that things and houses and bank accounts matter quite a bit more than people." Ethan's face went pale, the blood draining from his cheeks as if I'd struck him. Clara, however, didn't miss a beat. She gave a forced, brittle laugh and reached for the pen I had just set down. "Arthur, you're being sentimental. It's sweet, really, but we're talking about your future. We're talking about making sure you're taken care of. Let's not let childhood stories get in the way of practical decisions." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the hunger. It wasn't just about the money for her. It was about the control. She wanted to erase the last vestige of the man who had built this life so she could pave over it with her own ambitions. "Practical decisions," I repeated. "Yes, let's talk about those." I spent the afternoon with Victor. Do you remember Victor, Ethan? He was your godfather. He helped me set up your college fund. He also helped me realize something today, that I am far more lucid than you two seem to think." The notary looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight and glancing at the door. Clara's eyes snapped to Ethan, silently demanding he take control of the situation. "Dad, what are you saying?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking. "We're just trying to help. This isn't an interrogation." "Isn't it?" I stood up, my joints popping, but my back straighter than it had been in years. I felt a surge of adrenaline that washed away the fatigue. "I heard you both the other night, in the kitchen. I heard the appraiser's estimate. 1.2 million, wasn't it? $1 million obstacle, Clara. That's what I am to you." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's mouth hung open for a split second before she snapped it shut, her expression shifting from false sweetness to cold, calculated defiance. The mask had slipped, and the predator underneath was finally visible. "You were eavesdropping," she hissed, her voice dropping the pretense of kindness. "Fine. If you want the truth, Arthur, here it is. You're living in a museum. This house is rotting around you, and you're just sitting here, waiting for the end. We have lives to live. Ethan has a career that needs funding. We want to move to the heights, to a place that reflects who we are. Why should all this wealth sit trapped in old bricks and mortar while we struggle to make our mark?" "Struggle?" I felt a bitter laugh bubble up. "I gave you the down payment for your home. I paid for your cars. I have been your safety net for a decade. And now, because you want a bigger house and a flashier neighborhood, you want to put me in a room with a twin bed and a plastic tray for my meals?" "It's a premier facility," Clara shouted, her composure finally breaking. "You'd have everything you need. Why are you being so selfish?" Selfish. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I turned to my son, the boy I had held in my arms when he was feverish, the man I had hugged at his wedding with tears of joy in my eyes. "Ethan, is this what you think? Am I just an obstacle to your mark on the world?" Ethan looked at the table, then at his wife, then finally at me. There was a flicker of shame in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by a much stronger force. Cowardice. "Dad, it's a lot of money, and we could really use it. You're always saying you want the best for me. Well, this is it. This is the best for our future, the last string of my heart, the one that had been holding on to the hope that my son was just misguided, finally snapped. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Instead, it felt like a door closing, solid, heavy, and final. "I see," I said softly. I turned to the notary. "Sir, I believe your services won't be needed today. My son and his wife are leaving." "Arthur, don't be dramatic," Clara snapped, grabbing the documents. "We're not leaving until we settle this. You're clearly not in your right mind. Maybe we should call a doctor to evaluate your competency. If you won't sign voluntarily, we can always go the legal route. We can have you declared unfit." The threat hung in the air like a poisonous fog. She was willing to go that far. She was willing to drag me through a courtroom and brand me as senile, just to get her hands on the deed to this house. "You could try," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But before you do, you should know that Victor and I spent 4 hours today transferring every single asset I own into a private, irrevocable trust. This house, my savings, my pension, they are no longer mine in the eyes of the law. They belong to the trust. And do you know who the beneficiary of that trust is?" Clara froze. Ethan looked up, his eyes widening. "It's not you, Ethan," I said, staring directly at my son. "And it's certainly not you, Clara. The beneficiary is a local charity for orphan children. The trust is managed by a board that you have no access to. If I die tomorrow, or if I move into a home, or if I stay here until I'm 100, you will not see a single cent of that 1.2 million. Not now, not ever." The look on Clara's face was worth more than the house itself. Her skin turned a sickly shade of gray, and her hands began to shake, with a mixture of rage and shock. You did what? You gave it away. Our inheritance? It was never yours, Clara, I said firmly. It was mine. And I've decided that I'd rather give it to children who have nothing than to a son who already has everything and still wants to take the roof from over his father's head. Ethan stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. Dad, you can't be serious. You're cutting me out, your only son. You cut yourself out the moment you stepped into this house with those papers, Ethan. You traded your father for a real estate appraisal. Now please, get out of my house. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. For a moment, even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to stop, as if the very house was holding its breath. Ethan looked at me as if I were a stranger, his mouth slightly agape, while Clara's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The predatory elegance she usually maintained shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "You old fool!" Clara shrieked, her voice cracking the stillness. She slammed her hand onto the dining table, making the fine china rattle. "You've ruined everything!" "Do you have any idea what we've committed to? We've already put a non-refundable deposit on the Heights property. We've told everyone. You can't just give away what belongs to this family." "It doesn't belong to the family, Clara," I said, my voice eerily calm compared to her hysteria. "It belongs to the man who earned it, and that man has decided that his family has failed the most basic test of loyalty. As for your deposit, that sounds like a practical decision you made without consulting the owner of the collateral. Not very smart for someone who prides herself on being a strategist." Ethan finally found his voice, though it was weak and trembling. "Dad, please, let's just talk about this. You're angry, I get it. We pushed too hard, but a charity? You're going to leave me with nothing, after everything?" I turned my gaze to my son, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to comfort him. I didn't feel the need to reach out and tell him it would be okay. "After everything, Ethan. Let's talk about everything. I gave you a childhood of abundance. I gave you an education that opened every door in this city. I gave you the capital to start your own life. And in return, you didn't give me your time, or your care, or even your honesty. You gave me a brochure for a warehouse for the elderly, so you could move into a bigger zip code. You didn't just want my money, Ethan. You wanted me gone." "That's not true," he shouted, but he couldn't maintain eye contact. He looked at the wallpaper, the floor, the empty chair where his mother used to sit. We thought you'd be safer there." "Liar," I said. The word was small, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You let her whisper in your ear until you forgot who I was. You stopped being my son and started being her accomplice." Clara grabbed Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his expensive sleeve. "Don't plead with him, Ethan. Look at him. He's gone senile. This proves it. Who in their right mind gives $1 million to orphans when their own blood is standing right here? We'll contest the trust. We'll tell the court he was under duress, that Victor manipulated him. We'll fight this." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "Go ahead, Clara. Try. Victor is one of the most respected estate attorneys in the state. He recorded our entire session today. He had a psychiatrist present, a colleague of his who spent 2 hours talking to me before I signed a single page. There is a certified medical report stating that I am in peak mental health, fully aware of my actions and acting of my own free will. You want to go to court? You'll be laughed out of the building, and you'll spend the last of your savings on legal fees just to watch me win." The color drained from her face again. She realized then that I hadn't just built a wall, I had built a fortress. I had anticipated her every move, because I had spent 30 years anticipating the moves of much smarter, much more dangerous people in the world of business. She was a shark in a small pond, but I was the ocean. "I hate you," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I have hated every minute of sitting in this dusty, pathetic house, pretending to care about your boring stories and your dead wife. The door is right there," I pointed toward the foyer. "And since you hate the house so much, you'll be happy to know you'll never have to step foot in it again. In fact, if I see either of you on my property after tonight, I'll have the police remove you for trespassing. I've already contacted a security firm. The locks are being changed tomorrow morning." Ethan looked horrified. "Dad, you're disowning me over this?" "No, Ethan," I said, walking toward the door and holding it open. "You disowned me the moment you signed those intake papers for Silver Oaks behind my back. I'm just making the paperwork official. Now, leave, both of you." Clara stormed out first, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood. She didn't look back. She was already likely calculating her next move, or perhaps realizing that her Heights dream had just turned into a nightmare of debt. Ethan lingered at the threshold. He looked small. For a second, I saw the little boy who used to be afraid of the dark, and a pang of grief hit me so hard I almost lost my breath. But then I remembered the $1,000,000 obstacle, and my heart turned back to stone. "Is this really it?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "It is," I replied. "I hope the house in the Heights was worth it, Ethan, because you just lost the only person in the world who would have died for you." I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the most final thing I had ever heard. I stood in the foyer, listening to their car engine start and fade away into the distance. The house was silent again, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. The silence that followed their departure was not the heavy, suffocating kind I had lived with since Eleanor passed. It was a vacuum, sucking out the poison they had left behind. I walked through the house, room by room, turning on every light. I wanted to see the wood grain of the banisters I had polished, the books I had collected, and the photographs that Clara had once called clutter. For the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged to me again, not to the ghosts of the future they were trying to steal. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a cold realization settled in. I was 60 years old, and I was truly alone. I had cut off my only child, the son I had taught to fish. The boy I had stayed up with during every bout of the flu was gone, not to the grave, but to the darker side of human nature. The betrayal hurt more than the attempted theft. Money is just paper and ink, but the loss of a child's loyalty is a wound that never quite heals. It scabs over, sure, but it throbbed in the quiet of the night. The next morning, the locksmith arrived at 7 a.m. As he worked on the front door, I stood on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Across the street, the Miller family was loading their kids into a minivan. I wondered if those children would one day look at their father and see a dollar sign instead of a hero. I hoped not. "All set, Mr. Sterling," the locksmith said, handing me a set of heavy silver keys. "New deadbolts, reinforced plates. Nobody's getting in here without your say-so." "Thank you," I said, feeling the cold metal in my palm. It was the weight of my new reality. I spent the rest of the week purging. I didn't want anything in this house that reminded me of the concerned visits from Ethan and Clara. I packed up the expensive wine Ethan liked, the silk cushions Clara had brought over to brighten the place up, and even the guest towels they used. I took it all to a local shelter. If they wanted to benefit from my life, they would have to do it through the charity I had set up, not through my living room. On Thursday, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. "Dad, please, Clara is a mess. The bank is calling about our bridge loan. We're going to lose our deposit and our reputation. Just talk to us. We can fix this." I deleted it without replying. Reputation, that was the word that stuck in my throat. They weren't worried about my heart. They were worried about their standing in the social circles of the Heights. They had gambled on my weakness and lost. A few hours later, Victor called. "Arthur, I just got a call from a lawyer representing your son. A young guy, very aggressive. He's threatening to file for a guardianship hearing. He claims you've been unduly influenced by me, and that your sudden change in estate planning is proof of a mental breakdown. I felt a spark of the old fire. Let them try, Victor. Did you keep the recordings? I did, Victor chuckled, and I have the psychiatrist's signed affidavit. But Arthur, these things can get ugly. They'll try to dig up anything. They'll say you're depressed because of Eleanor, that you're acting out of spite. Are you ready for a public fight? I've spent my life on the docks, Victor. I've dealt with unions, crooked foremen, and icy winters that would break a younger man's spirit. If they want a fight, I'll give them one. But I won't just sit in a courtroom. I'm going to show them exactly what an unfit man can do. I hung up and went to my basement. In the corner under a heavy canvas tarp sat my old workbench. I hadn't used it much since the funeral, but I needed to move. I needed to build. I started a project, a simple wooden chest for the orphanage I was now sponsoring. As the saw bit into the oak, the scent of sawdust filled the air, grounding me. But Clara wasn't done. She wasn't the type to go down quietly. 2 days later, I saw a familiar car pull up to the curb. It wasn't Ethan's. It was a sleek, black SUV I didn't recognize. Clara stepped out, but she wasn't alone. She had a woman with her, dressed in a professional suit and carrying a clipboard. I walked to the front door, but I didn't open the glass storm door. I watched them through the pane. "Arthur!" Clara shouted, her voice high and strained. She looked like she hadn't slept. "This is Ms. Gable from Adult Protective Services. We've expressed some concerns about your living conditions and your recent erratic behavior. She just needs to do a wellness check." The woman with the clipboard looked at me with a practiced, neutral expression. "Mr. Sterling, I'm just here to ensure you're safe and that you have everything you need. May we come in?" I looked at Clara. Behind the concern, I saw the triumph. She thought she had found a loophole. She thought she could use the system to force her way back into my life and my bank account. "Ms. Gable," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the door. "I appreciate the work you do, truly, but I think you've been misinformed. If you look at your records, you'll see that I am a major donor to the city's youth programs and have a clean bill of health from the chief of geriatrics at Mercy Hospital. However, if you feel a check is necessary, I invite you to come back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. with my attorney, Victor Vance, present. Until then, you are trespassing on private property." I turned my gaze to Clara. "And as for you, Clara, I told you the locks were changed. Did you think a clipboard would act as a key?" "You're insane!" Clara screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. "You're sitting in there, rotting alone. Ethan is your only family. Who's going to hold your hand when you die? The orphans, the lawyers?" "Maybe," I said calmly. "But at least I know their hands won't be reaching for my wallet while my heart is still beating." I closed the heavy oak door and turned the deadbolt. The sound of the click was my answer. I went back to the basement, back to my oak chest, and let the rhythm of the work drown out the screeching of the woman who thought she could break me. The following morning the house was quiet, but it was the quiet of a battlefield before the final charge. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Ms. Gable from Adult Protective Services, looking much more formal, and Victor standing beside her, looking like a silver-haired lion in a three-piece suit. There was no sign of Clara or Ethan. They knew better than to face Victor directly. "Shall we?" I invited them in. The inspection lasted 2 hours. Ms. Gable went through every room, checked the pantry, looked at the heating system, and even examined my medicine cabinet. I didn't mind. I showed her the oak chest I was building in the basement. I showed her the vibrant garden I was preparing for spring. I showed her the stack of books on my nightstand. Most importantly, Victor showed her the legal documents, the trust, the psychiatric evaluation, and the security footage from the night I had asked Ethan and Clara to leave. By the time we sat down in the living room, Ms. Gable's neutral expression had softened into something resembling sympathy. "Mr. Sterling," she said, closing her folder, It is quite clear to me that you are not only capable of caring for yourself, but that you are thriving. I've seen many cases of elder abuse, but usually it's the other way around. It's heart-wrenching to see a family attempt to use state resources as a weapon for personal gain. Will there be a report? Victor asked. Yes, she replied, and it will state that the claims made against Mr. Sterling were not only unfounded, but appeared to be made with malicious intent. This file will be closed permanently. After she left, Victor stayed for a cup of coffee. He looked at me over the rim of his mug, his eyes sharp. You won this round, Arthur, but they're desperate. Desperate people don't think about the long-term consequences of their actions. They only see the immediate fire they need to put out. What fire is that? I asked. The bridge loan, Victor said. I did some digging. Ethan and Clara didn't just put a deposit down on that Heights property. They took out a high-interest short-term loan to cover the gap, using their current apartment as collateral and betting on the imminent sale of this house to pay it off. If they don't get $1.2 million in the next 60 days, they lose their apartment, their deposit, and their credit rating. I felt a hollow ache where my heart used to be. My son was on the verge of ruin, and he had put himself there by trying to ruin me. I didn't want this for him, Victor. I wanted him to be successful. I wanted him to be a man of character. Character is forged in the fire, Arthur, Victor said gently. Maybe this is the first time in his life he's actually had to face the heat without you holding a fan. He was right. I had spent Ethan's entire life protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. When he crashed his first car, I bought him a better one. When he failed his first business venture, I covered the losses. I had raised a man-child who believed the world and his father owed him a living. The weeks that followed were a test of my resolve. The phone calls started again, but the tone had changed. It wasn't threats anymore. It was begging. Ethan called me late one night, his voice thick with tears and alcohol. Dad, please, they're going to take the apartment. Clara is threatening to leave me. She says I'm a failure. She says I'm not half the man you are. Please, just one loan, just $500,000. I'll pay it back, I swear. I'll come over every weekend. I'll fix the roof. I'll do anything. I listened to him sob, and, for a moment, the old Arthur wanted to reach through the phone and pull him to safety. But I remembered the conversation in the kitchen. I remembered the word obstacle. I remembered the notary sitting at my table, ready to strip me of my dignity. Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. You are 32 years old. You have a degree, a job, and a wife you chose. If she is leaving you because you can't provide her with a mansion in the Heights, then perhaps you should let her go. As for the money, I told you, it belongs to the trust now. I don't have $500,000. I have a home and a pension, and that is all. You're lying, he screamed, the grief turning back into entitlement. You're just doing this to punish me. You'd rather see me on the street than admit you're a bitter old man. If being on the street is what it takes for you to finally grow up, Ethan, then that is a price I am willing to let you pay. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I realized then that the sad story of my family wasn't about the money. It was about the slow, quiet death of a father's hope. I had lost my son long before he brought those papers into my house. I had lost him when I stopped being his father and started being his ATM. The next morning I received a formal notice. Clara had filed for divorce. She was suing Ethan for misrepresentation of assets, claiming he had lied about his expected inheritance to induce her into marriage and financial commitments. She was stripping him of everything he had left. It was a cold, calculated move, the kind of move she had tried to pull on me. I almost felt sorry for him, almost, but then I looked at the oak chest in my workshop, nearly finished and ready for the children who actually needed help. And I realized that for the first time in my life, I was building something that wasn't for a son who didn't appreciate it. I was building something for the world. The news of the divorce hit the local social columns like a splash of cold water, but inside the walls of my home, there was only a profound ringing silence. Clara was gone. She had vanished from Ethan's life as quickly as she had entered it, wetting her designer coats, her sharp ambitions, and whatever remained of his shattered dignity. She didn't want a husband. She wanted a portfolio, and when she realized Ethan's portfolio was an empty shell, she cut her losses without a second glance. I expected a sense of triumph, a feeling of, "I told you so." But all I felt was a weary sadness. I sat on my porch, watching the leaves of the old oak tree turn a deep bruised crimson as autumn settled over the city. My son was now a man with nothing, no wife, no home, and no father. A week later, I found him sitting on my front steps. It was raining, a miserable gray drizzle that soaked through his thin jacket. He didn't have his SUV anymore. He didn't have his expensive watch. He looked like a ghost of the boy I used to know. He didn't try to come inside. He just sat there, head in his hands, shivering. I opened the door and stood behind the glass. "What do you want, Ethan?" He looked up, and the sight of his eyes nearly broke me. They were red-rimmed and hollow. "I have nowhere else to go, Dad. The bank changed the locks this morning. Clara's lawyer frozen our joint account. I've been sleeping in my office, but they let me go yesterday. Restructuring, they called it. But everyone knows, everyone saw the headlines. And you thought you'd come back here," I said, my voice flat. "I just need a place to stay, just for a few days, until I can get back on my feet." He reached out toward the door, his hand trembling. "Please, Dad, I'm your son. You were my son when you were planning to send me to Silver Oaks," I reminded him. "You were my son when you sat at my table and tried to trick me into signing away my life. Where was that son then, Ethan? Was he hiding behind Clara's skirt? Or was he too busy counting the money he hadn't earned yet?" "I was wrong," he sobbed, the sound muffled by the rain. "I was a coward. I let her get in my head. She told me you were lonely, that you needed help, that we could take care of everything if we just had the resources. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I wanted the life she promised. And what life was that? A life built on the carcass of your father's legacy." I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me so the warmth of the house wouldn't escape. "I gave you every tool to build your own life, Ethan. But you didn't want to build. You wanted to harvest what I had already grown." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I believe you're sorry that you're wet and cold and broke," I said, looking down at him. "But I don't know if you're sorry for what you did to me. You didn't just try to take my house. You tried to take my agency. You tried to take my right to be a man in my own home." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small roll of cash. Not much, just a few $100s I had set aside for the grocery run. I walked down the steps and held it out to him. "Take this," I said. "It's enough for a motel and some food for a week." He looked at the money, then at me, hope flickering in his eyes. "Can I come in after I get some food?" "No," I said, and the word felt like a mountain moving. "The locks aren't just on the doors, Ethan. They're on the life we used to have. You can't come back here. Not like this, not because you've failed and have nowhere else to turn. If I let you in now, I'm just being your safety net again. And as long as I'm your safety net, you'll never learn how to fly. Or how to fall." "You're really going to leave me out here?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. "I'm leaving you to the life you chose. You wanted to be a man of practical decisions. This is the result of your choices. Use that money to find a job. Any job. Wash dishes, sweep floors, do what I did when I was 20. Build something that belongs to you, and maybe in a year or 5 or 10 we can sit on this porch and talk. But not today." I turned around and walked back into the house. I didn't look back. I went into the kitchen, made a pot of tea, and watched through the window as he finally stood up, took the money and walked down the street until he disappeared into the gray mist of the city. My heart was heavy, but my hands were steady. I knew that by saving him now I would be destroying him forever. He needed to be the million-dollar obstacle in his own way. He needed to feel the weight of the world without me holding it up for him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was the only act of love I had left to give. The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life, but it was a productive, healing silence. I finished the oak chest and delivered it to the orphanage. Seeing the faces of children who truly had nothing, no parents, no legacy, no safety net, put my own heartbreak into perspective. I began to volunteer there twice a week, teaching the older boys the basics of woodworking. I wasn't just Arthur, the man with the big house and the inheritance. I was just Arthur, the man who knew how to turn a rough piece of timber into something useful. I heard snippets of news about Clara through Victor. She hadn't fared as well as she planned. Her reputation as a climber had preceded her in the heights, and without the backing of my estate, the social circles she craved slammed their doors in her face. She was entangled in lawsuits. Her credit was ruined, and the last he heard, she was moving back to her small hometown in the Midwest. Her dreams of Chicago royalty reduced to a pile of legal bills. She had tried to play a game of chess with people's lives, but she forgot that when the board is flipped, everyone loses. As for Ethan, I stayed true to my word. I didn't go looking for him. I didn't check social media. I didn't ask Victor to track his phone. Every time I felt the urge to call him, to see if he was eating or if he had a roof over his head, I looked at the spot on the dining room table where those standard papers had sat. I reminded myself that mercy without justice is just weakness. Then, on a Tuesday in early December, a letter arrived. It wasn't a legal summons and it wasn't a bill. It was a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper and a receipt. The note was short. Dad, I'm working at a warehouse near the docks. It's cold and the hours are long, but I'm earning my own keep. The attached receipt is for the first $50 of the money you gave me on the porch. I'll pay back the rest as soon as I can. You were right. I didn't know what it meant to be a man. I'm trying to learn. You don't have to call me. I just wanted you to know that the locks worked. They forced me to find my own key. I sat at my kitchen table and read that note until the ink blurred. It wasn't an apology for the money. It was an acknowledgement of the truth. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan wasn't looking for a shortcut. He was standing in the cold, doing the hard work, and realizing that a father's love isn't a bank account. It's a compass. I didn't rush to find him. I didn't send him a check. I simply put the note in a drawer, next to Eleanor's old letters. The path to reconciliation is a long one, and it cannot be paved with old habits. He had to stay in that warehouse. He had to feel the sting of the winter wind on the docks, just like I had. He had to learn that the things you build with your own hands are the only things that can never be taken away from you. My life at 60 had changed in ways I never could have imagined. I was living alone. Yes, but I wasn't lonely. I had my garden, my workshop, and the children at the center, who looked at me not as an obstacle, but as a mentor. I had protected my home, but more importantly, I had protected my soul from the bitterness that betrayal often leaves behind. I realized that the sad story of my family was actually a story of survival. It was about a man who refused to be a victim and a son who was finally being given the chance to be a human being instead of a predator. The house on the corner of the Chicago street stood tall, its lights glowing warm against the falling snow. It was no longer a museum of the past or a target for the greedy. It was a fortress of truth. The winter in Chicago eventually yielded to a cautious spring. The snow melted away, revealing the resilient green of the grass I had planted with Eleanor so many years ago. I continued my routine, the orphanage, the workshop, and the quiet evenings by the fireplace. But something had shifted within me. The anger that had acted as my armor was beginning to soften into a quiet, reflective peace. I had reclaimed my life, but I was also learning that a life lived solely for oneself is a different kind of cage. I began to receive a letter every month from Ethan. They were never pleas for help. They were reports from the front lines of a man discovering his own strength. He wrote about the physical ache of a 10-hour shift, the camaraderie of the men he worked with, and the simple dignity of paying for a small studio apartment with his own wages. He never mentioned Clara. It was as if that entire chapter of his life had been a fever dream from which he had finally woken up. In May, a year after the night he had tried to take my home, I decided it was time. I didn't call him. I didn't send a car. I simply wrote a short note on the back of his last receipt. Sunday, 6 p.m. Dinner. Bring nothing but yourself. When the doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m., I felt a tremor of nerves I hadn't felt in decades. I opened the door to find a man I barely recognized. He was leaner, his face weathered by the elements and hard work. His hands, once soft and manicured, were now calloused and scarred. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. The entitlement was gone. The frantic, shifting gaze of a man looking for an advantage had been replaced by a steady, humble clarity. "Hello, Dad," he said softly. "Come in, Ethan." The dinner was quiet, but the silence wasn't heavy. We talked about the docks, the logistics of the warehouse, and the projects I was working on at the orphanage. We didn't talk about the trust, the house, or the betrayal. Those things were the ghosts of the people we used to be. We were two men sitting at a table, rediscovering the language of respect. As he got up to leave, he stopped at the door. He looked around the foyer, at the mahogany banisters and the photos on the wall. "I'm glad you kept the house, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to you. It always did. I'm just sorry I had to lose everything to see that." "You didn't lose everything, Ethan," I said, placing a calloused hand on his shoulder. "You lost a version of yourself that was never going to make you happy. What you found is worth much more than $1.2 million. He nodded, a single tear tracking through the dust of his workday that he hadn't yet washed away. "I'll see you next month." "Make it next Sunday," I replied, "and wear your work clothes. The orphanage needs a new set of bookshelves, and my back isn't what it used to be. I could use a strong pair of hands." A genuine smile broke across his face, the first real smile I had seen from my son in years. "I'll be here, Dad, early." As I watched him walk down the street toward the bus stop, I realized that the story I had set out to tell, a story of drama, betrayal, and family fraud, had ended in a way I hadn't expected. I had set out to protect my property, but I had ended up saving my son. By standing my ground and refusing to be a victim, I had forced him to stop being a predator and start being a man. The betrayal was the catalyst, but the truth was the cure. The house felt warmer that night. The shadows were gone. I went to the basement and looked at my workbench, seeing the tools laid out in perfect order. Life at 60 isn't the end, it's just the beginning of a different kind of craftsmanship. You can't always choose the wood you're given, but you can always choose how you shape it. The years rolled on, and the rhythm of our new life became a steady, comforting heartbeat. Ethan became a fixture at the orphanage on weekends. To the children, he wasn't a man who had once lost his way. He was the strong, quiet mentor who taught them how to measure twice and cut once. We spent our Saturday mornings in my basement, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and the sound of shared stories. He never asked for a cent, and I never offered one. The greatest gift I had given him was the realization that he didn't need my money to be a person of value. I am 65 now. My hair is a shock of white, and my hands are slower, but my heart has never been fuller. The house at the corner remains a symbol of resilience in our Chicago neighborhood. It is no longer just a $1 million obstacle or a relic of a dead marriage. It is a lighthouse. It taught me that being a father sometimes means holding your ground when the person you love is trying to push you off a cliff. It taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the boundaries we set to protect the love within that blood. Every Sunday, as we sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and violet, I am reminded that life is a series of choices. Clara chose greed and found herself alone in a world that didn't care for her. Ethan chose the hard path of redemption and found a father he had almost discarded. And I chose to stand tall, to value my own worth, and to believe that it is never too late for a man or a family to be rebuilt from the ground up. My story started with the cold shadow of betrayal, but it ends in the warmth of the sun. I am Arthur Sterling, and I have learned that the most valuable asset I own isn't the deed to this house or the balance in my trust. It is the peace of mind that comes from knowing I am no longer a victim of my own kindness. I am a man who stood his ground, and in doing so, I didn't just save my home, I saved my soul. Thank you for listening to this journey of betrayal and redemption here on Dr. Harmony. This story serves as a reminder that we must protect our peace and our dignity, even from those we love most. If this story touched your heart or gave you strength, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us share these powerful life lessons with the world. Until next time, stay strong and stay grounded. Would you like me to create another story for your channel?